All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome back to Finovate, Ottawa's track at Discover Tech 2022. We hope you enjoyed our previous keynote session that we had a few days back, and also had the chance to check out some of the other tracks in between as well. This morning, we'll be hearing another keynote presentation led by Bena Lands from the Bank of Canada. Bena is a principal economist at the Fintech Policy and Research Division within the Financial Stability Department of the Bank of Canada. Her areas of focus are cryptocurrencies, CBDC, and Fintech more broadly, and how these innovations could impact the financial system. Bena also holds a Master in Law and Economics from Queen Mary University, as well as a Master's of Science in Economics from the University of Montreal, and a Bachelor's of Commerce from McGill University. Please join us in welcoming Bena Lands.
Well, hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me today. So like I said, I'll be here speaking to you about FinTech. I'll start by providing an overview of what FinTech is, its various sectors, what the Bank of Canada is doing in the space, and I'll finish with some skills and career paths to wrap it up. Before I get started, I'll just like to say that today I'll be sharing my personal views, which do not necessarily represent those of the Bank of Canada or Governing Council. So with that out of the way, I'll just jump into it. So what is FinTech? Well, the term FinTech stands for financial technology. And really it's a catch-all term for a broad range of products, services, firms, and technology that are digitizing and modernizing the financial and payment systems. And the way FinTechs are doing this is by using many different types of technologies. Some of these technologies are new, such as blockchains, which some of you may have heard of, but others are technologies that have existed for a long time, but they've just not been used in the financial or payment sector. One example of a FinTech that some of you may be aware of is Apple Pay. And this allows users to pay with their phone, and that's what the image is on your screen. And FinTechs are modernizing really all parts of the financial and payment system. And so over the next few slides, what I'll first do is I'll give an overview of the system. So then we can start to understand where FinTechs exist, operate, and how they're going to provide new services. So if we take a step back, the financial and payment system can be separated into the front end, which is what we, the consumer, see. So like an app, a website, or the physical bank building that we can walk into. But then there is the back end, and this is the infrastructure on which all the services operate and rely on. And FinTechs, they are innovating and operating in both the back and front end, as there's opportunities to modernize and improve both of those areas. So now let's dig down further into what makes up the front and back end of the financial and payments system. So if we first look at the front end, we can see that there are four key elements that make up the system. There are financial institutions, such as banks, which we all know, and some of you may even have bank accounts already. And what banks do, they hold customers' money, they make payments for them, but they also loan money to individuals and businesses. So one type of loan you might be familiar with is a mortgage, and that's a special loan to buy a house with, and that is something that banks specialize in. Then there are financial markets, such as stock markets, which you may have heard of. And this is a stock market is where businesses can sell parts of their company to investors. Investors can then exchange these parts between each other. Now, parts of companies are called stocks, and stock is a type of financial instrument. Financial instruments like stocks and bonds are used by companies to raise money so that they can invest in new projects. And they're a way for investors to get exposure to companies with the hopes that they're going to make parts of the profits that those companies will make in the future. And then lastly, there are financial services, of which there are many, many different kinds. And there's just one that I'll highlight to you here, is what is the financial advisor. And that is someone whose job it is to help their clients manage their money. So what we see here on the slide, these are the foundational elements of the financial system. And they are what allow individuals and firms to keep their money safe, but also, and perhaps more importantly, transfer their money, borrow, lend, and invest their money for a variety of purposes. And fintechs, they're trying to provide these services and products in new ways, and often they're trying to do it in better, efficient, and cheaper ways. So the front end, which we just saw, they need an infrastructure on which to operate. And the easiest way to think about how this whole system works together is to think about the transport system, which we all know. Money, stocks, and financial services are like the cars and trains, while the back end is the infrastructure, like the roads, train tracks, and paths. And just like there are different transport infrastructures, there are different back end systems. So the payment systems are used to move money around, while there are these clearing and settlement systems. These are used to move financial instruments like stocks and bonds between investors and issuers. These systems are very important. We often don't hear about them, we often don't see them, but without them, the system wouldn't work. And when they stop to work or there's an issue, it's just like when the roads have not been cleared in the winter, well, you probably can't get to school or your soccer practice. And so it's really important that these systems are managed well, so the financial system operates, just as it's important for the transport system to operate well. And the infrastructure, it's just like the transport infrastructure needs to be well maintained. And those who maintain the system is the central bank, commercial bank, and other institutions. And what their role is in the system is they manage, operate, and supervise the infrastructure, just like how the government maintains the roads and cleans the roads. So now that we have a bit of an overview of what and who operates the front and back in the financial and payment system, we can now start taking a look at what fintechs are doing in it. So on this slide, what you can see is an atlas of the fintech ecosystem as it looks today, and this is from Cambridge University. What you'll probably notice is that there are so many sectors as well as subsectors in which fintechs are finding new ways to do things. What you may also notice is that fintechs are active in both the front and back end of the system. So for example, in turquoise, we can see that wealth tech is a big fintech area right now. Wealth techs, and what they are, wealth techs are financial services that help manage people's money. And this is a front-end service. While if we look at the purple bubble, we can see digital payments, which are new and improved payment infrastructure. Therefore, these are in the back end. So on this slide, you'll just see a few examples I've highlighted where fintechs are really innovating right now, which are the big hot areas. And over the next few slides, we'll look at these more in depth. That said, there's many more sectors and subsectors, and for any of you of those that are interested, I would definitely recommend visiting this public atlas that's provided by Cambridge University. So let's dig down. So first, let's talk a little bit about digital banks. So banks already exist, you may already have an account, but there's these things now called digital banks, which are also, you may have heard them as challenger banks or neobanks. And what's different about them is that they only exist online. They don't have any physical buildings to walk into. And they often offer their services through an app, and they tend to target younger consumers, as well as offer very specialized products for those consumers. One of the biggest digital banks right now in Canada is Neo, which you can see on the slide and which some of you may be aware of, maybe even have account at. And the way these new challenger banks compete with the banks that have been around for a long time, the traditional banks, is that they have lower costs because they have no physical buildings or physical presence they need to maintain. So that's their advantage there. Wealth tech, which is another type of fintech, are companies that provide service to help people and businesses manage and invest their money, as I mentioned previously quickly. One type of wealth tech are robo-advisors. And these are platforms that automatically invest customers' money based on their financial goals. A really big robo-advisor in Canada at the moment is a company called Wealthsimple. And some of you maybe have seen their ads on TV or other places. Another very popular type of wealth tech are financial comparison sites. These sites allow consumers to compare different products, such as mortgages or credit cards, so that they can more easily choose which one is best for them. On the slide here, you can see an example of a mortgage comparison service where the cost of the same type of mortgage from different banks are listed. And lastly, a very hot fintech sector that has grown a lot over the last few years is digital payments and payment services. And payment fintechs can either provide front-end services such as digital wallets like Apple Pay or back-end infrastructure. One of the new technologies that fintechs are trying to use for payments infrastructure is blockchain technology. And this is the technology behind cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. So who are the firms that are involved in fintech? Well, all different types of institutions are getting into the fintech industry. So first, there are, of course, a lot of startups. And startups are just new companies founded for a very specific purpose. And these ones are founded to be a fintech. So someone might have a new idea of a new service that they think would be really useful to Canadians. And so they will start a new company, and that will be a fintech startup. However, they're not the only ones innovating and entering the industry. There are also large companies that are entering as well. Some of these are the big banks like TD. Others are like big tech like Apple, Google, Facebook. And these companies, they have many ways to enter. Sometimes they'll build a new fintech service themselves, but other times they'll decide to partner with a firm or buy one up as a way to get into the industry. Then there are the companies that invest in fintechs. These are called venture funds or venture capital. And these firms, they're actually financial firms, but they'll specialize investing into fintech products and services and infrastructures. And finally, the last group of institutions are governments and other public institutions. And they're also developing fintech, or they'll choose to hire a firm or partner with a private company to develop a fintech service or product that they think the public needs, or that they think their institution needs, and it'll help them do whatever they need to do, but in a better, more efficient way. And so in the next few slides, I'll talk about what the Bank of Canada, is doing in the fintech space at the moment. So as mentioned previously in the intro, so the Bank of Canada is the central bank for Canada. And its job is to promote the economic and financial health of Canada and Canadians. And it does this in essentially 5 ways. Now, the first thing we do is that we determine the cost of money. And we do this by setting the interest rate at which banks can lend between themselves. And this process is called conducting monetary policy, which perhaps some of you have heard of. Something else the Bank of Canada does is that we promote a safe and stable financial system. An example of how we do this is, for instance, we ensure that the Canadian payment system, so the infrastructure I spoke about before, is working well. Another thing we do is we supply Canada's paper money, which we call banknotes. And what we do, we design these. We also develop new technology to make sure they're safe and they can't be reproduced. And Canada is actually one of the best in the world at creating really safe, hard to counterfeit money. The bank also acts as the bank to the government. So when the government needs to leave its money somewhere, it leaves it with us for safekeeping. And we also act as the bank to the commercial banks. And lastly, and this is how we're already starting to enter the fintech space, is we are now starting to supervise retail payment service providers. So these are fintechs that provide payment services such as digital wallets. So those that we covered a bit earlier. But this is not the only thing the Bank of Canada is doing in the fintech space. We are doing other things as well. And one of those things that my team is working on is understanding how fintechs could change the financial system and payment system. So for instance, we're thinking about what kind of new services could fintechs create in the future and what type of impact that will have. We also are trying to think about who will be the financial institutions of the future and if they will be much different than the current ones. And lastly, we also are wondering, will fintechs make Canadian lives better? And if so, how? Another initiative the Bank of Canada is undertaking in fintech is looking into the question of whether we should consider issuing a digital version of cash, given the world is going so digital. This would be called a central bank digital currency, or CBDC. And so these and other initiatives, what the Bank of Canada is currently doing in the fintech space. So now we've gone over the space and the institutions that work in it, I'll talk about how individuals get into fintech. So first, I'll let you know how I got into it. In terms of my education, I went to a math and science high school. Then I went to CEGEP, as I'm from Quebec, and there I followed a pure and applied science track. And at university, I studied finance, economics, and law at undergraduate and graduate level. Then looking in terms of work, I worked in startups and in banking before then joining the Bank of Canada as an economist. So my background has really always been very STEM focused and STEM oriented, but that's not the only type of backgrounds that work, and it's not always the case. And so I'll talk a bit about how other people get into fintech. And a lot of them have many different types of backgrounds. The reason is that a fintech firm is in many ways like any other firm, and that need people with different kind of skills, from math to writing to coding. There's someone that needs to do marketing. There's someone that needs to do the books. There's someone that needs to do sales. And so there's really all different types of opportunities and skills needed in fintech. Some of the common backgrounds for those that want to enter fintech and really develop products and services and infrastructure include computer science and data science, finance, economics, applied mathematics, physics, and engineering. And people sometimes now, because there's so many fintechs around, they'll get into fintech right off the bat from university, right when they graduate. But many, many others are joining the field after working the traditional financial and payment system for many years, because they bring a lot of expertise and knowledge that is often needed in these companies. And lastly, I'll just wrap up with some good skills to have. So some good skills, of course, are STEM skills. They're really important and handy in a lot of positions in fintech. Coding will open a lot of doors, not just in the fintech field, but as well in other industries, but especially in fintech. And if you don't already know how to code, I suggest start learning a language. An easy and good place to start is with Python, and there's many either free or affordable resources. So I would definitely suggest starting to learn if you don't already know already. And then, of course, there's understanding financial concepts as well as payment concepts and the theory, but also how the financial payment and system works overall. Because fintechs, what they're trying to do is really improve the system, improve the services, but you first need to understand what those systems and services are so that they can be improved. And lastly is, of course, the problem-solving mindset, because fintechs are trying to solve a problem and they make things better. So in order to improve them, need to have that mindset going in. So with that, I know that was short and sweet, hopefully, but we can open the floor with for any questions. I'm happy to answer. On the slide are just two interesting resources. One is the Bank of Canada's Financial System Hub, where there's all different types of articles on fintech and other topics. And as well, that's the Cambridge FinTech Ecosystem Atlas, which we did a quick overview of, but if you're interested in the field, it's a really fun, interactive resource that I find really informative. So I recommend checking it out. And that's it for me.
Perfect. So we'll now be moving into a little Q&A session. So we can use the Q&A function in Zoom just to send some questions. And yeah, we'll have Bena answer as best as she can.
Okay, should I just read the question out and I'll start answering?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first question is, how important is networking in this field, and how should we approach building a network as high school students? Well, I'll say I find with networking, it's best to just often get to know people by working with them, doing projects together. So if you're participating right now in Project Tech Conference, this is a great way to build those connections. As a high school student, I think if there's any opportunity, if there's any communities to get involved with, I would get involved with those. Sometimes there are things called meetups. So let's say you're interested in blockchain technology. There are public meetups you can go to and you see these interesting presentations. It's free, you can meet people. And that's a really good way to just connect, learn what's going on, and also figure out what you like and start building those connections. And that's a really good way. And if you can take courses on the topic, then you might get to know your teachers there, and they might be able to say, hey, I have a research project, or hey, we're looking for an intern this summer. Do you have time? So that's another really good way to get involved and to build a network. The other question, what are some of the challenges you have faced when you first got involved with fintech? So I think that's a good question. So I think one of the challenges is that it's so big and broad, and so people aren't often talking about the same thing when they talk about fintech. So first, I have to be really precise. You know, which industry are you talking about? Which industry are you focused on? The other is that it's often really hard to understand the systems that exist. So the payment systems and all these even capital markets, stock markets, how do they really work? Once you understand how those work, which is hard, and there's very few people who actually understand really well how those systems work. But once you do, then you can start to see, well, where there's need for improvement and where there's opportunity. But understanding those systems and how they work are not obvious. There's no like good textbooks on it. There's no good courses. You really just have to find those people in the field that have had years of experience and pick their brain. That's what I've found. So what do you think the future of digital banking looks like? Well, I'll talk a bit about the UK, who is a little more forward than Canada when it comes to digital banking. And there's a lot more players. And so customers have a lot more choice in terms of what bank they want to bank with. And because of that, they actually have more choice in terms of products and services that do things that your traditional bank may not do. And some of those banks are often, easier to use. Apps are really user-friendly. It's easy to open account. So I think in Canada, we'll see more of that, and we'll just see more banks. In Canada, we have essentially 6 big banks. And then there's a bunch of small ones. Most of us are with those 6 big ones. So we don't have a lot of choice. So I think as digital banking takes off in Canada, we'll have more choice and all different cool new products and services that are going to offer us what we want. Okay, so you mentioned all the different businesses involved with fintech. How do these different institution business structures, startup, large, becoming, government student, etc., work together to improve the field? Well, sometimes they work together, but sometimes they're actually competing. So like the previous question, digital banks are competing with traditional banks, which is a good thing for consumers, drives down prices, creates more choices. But sometimes it can create what we call quite a fragmented industry and things don't work well together. And so that's sometimes the role of government to come and coordinate between each other. Sometimes they work together if there's a mutual interest and it works out, but sometimes they're competing. But competition can be really good to provide new products, new services at a lower price. But that's a good question.
Yeah, so I think I have one just to add on to that as well. With all this competition and I guess the increasing popularity of fintech, do you think that we'll move completely towards the digital sort of scene for banking, or do you think we'll continue with both sides, like the traditional banking and digital banking?
I think we'll be for a long time with both. A lot of people still like to even have that person-to-person contact, especially when there's negotiations. If you think about older people, your grandparents, they're probably maybe not the most tech savvy. They might rather pay their bills in person. Sometimes we do need cash physically. Most you'll have to get somewhere in person. So I think there's going to be a lot of both, but proportionally, it's going to start shrinking more and more the in-person, both because often it's more convenient to just do something on your phone than go in person. And it's also often cheaper for those institutions to offer it digitally than in person. That's a very good question. Don't see any others. Oh, okay, and I was saying, do you think there are specific university programs that we must go to get involved? No, there's not. I wouldn't say specific. If you really want to be in a job or a role where you're building those capabilities, then some of the tracks I mentioned are definitely helpful. Like if you're in finance or computer programming, engineering, there are starting to be some programs in Canada and abroad in fintech, but it really depends what that fintech firm needs. If they need a programmer, well, it's what programming skills do you have? Do you have those ones or not? If you need mathematical modeling, that's really applicable across many fields. That's there's many schools and universities that have mathematical programming, applied math skills. So it's not like necessarily specific university programs. It's more you have to decide or figure out what you find interesting to do in the field, and then find those programs. But that said, there are starting to emerge fintech specific programs, but they are not necessarily needed. Okay. Were you originally planning to go in this field, or did you switch your career path multiple times before reaching this point? So I say I guess a bit of both in a way. I always liked, since university, in university, I discovered macroeconomics through my Bachelor of Commerce, and I really liked it. And then so a lot of my education following that was in the macroeconomics field and those sort of macro topics. And so when I worked in banking, I worked in corporate treasury, which is all about managing really big firms' money. So it's a macro perspective. And now, of course, I work at the central bank, which is the most classic place to go for if you're someone, a macroeconomist or interested in that field. But fintech has sort of made its way into that field separately. And so I've gotten exposure through university and through work because fintech, central banking, and finance have merged. So it wasn't really a plan. When I'm in university, I don't even think the fintech term existed yet. So I couldn't have planned to go into it, but it started to merge and it popped up, and it's really impacting almost everyone in fintech and economics. And so it's hard to avoid it now if you want to. Okay. Do you have any suggestions regarding co-ops during university? Co-ops are really great. I strongly recommend doing them. In terms of, I'm not familiar with the specific co-op programs, but if you can do one at a financial institution, whether a bank, an investment firm, a payments firm, and obviously in a fintech, that would be great. And you don't have to do it just like by being a programmer. You can be, in the sales and the communications and the strategy. There's all different ways to work at a fintech or firms that are in finance, economics. But I would suggest if you can do a co-op in one of those, there's opportunity exposure to fintech if it's not directly, indirectly. And so that's really a good option. But I'm not too familiar with the current co-op programs at the university. Okay, we may be finished the questions. Not sure if there's anyone who has any last ones left before we wrap up. Oh, there we go, one more. Are there any opportunity missed or regret not taking throughout your career? Wow, that's a big one. I think what's important is to try a lot, or try, if there's an opportunity to try something, to try it, because it's hard to tell from the outside looking in if you're going to like it and if you're going to enjoy it. I know for myself and so many other people I know, they thought they were going to like a certain industry or a certain sub-industry, and then they get there and they're like, this is not what I thought it was, or this is not what I wanted or what I thought I would like. So if you're curious about something, I would say, try it, because it may be great or you may not like it, but it might also expose you to something else that you liked more. So I'd say definitely, as much as possible, just expose yourself and try something early. Don't wait to be like, is this the perfect thing for me? Because you're honestly not going to know until you're in it and you're working it. So I love my job right now. I'm working in it. It took me a little while to get here, but it turns out this was really a good fit for me. But I also appreciate more because I've tried other things. And so I know what I like and what the other things are like. And I know that this is really good for me.
Perfect. So maybe we'll wait a couple more moments to see if there are any final questions trickling in before we close off.
That's good. I think there's one last one. Oh. Do you have any, thank you, insights? Do you have any final general suggestions for a high school student to find their career path? My general suggestion is keep your doors open. So if you can take subjects that opens more doors for you, then I would do them. So sometimes I know in high school now and university, there's often pressure to sort of pick one career path really early on, and you haven't tried much or been exposed to much. So try to take courses and try to keep your doors open, so that further down the line, you don't know what's going to exist. You're not going to know what's going to like. But if you're well prepared and trained, then you'll be able to take advantage of those opportunities. Another one that's a little more concrete, as I mentioned in presentation, I do strongly recommend to learn how to code at least one language. Coding is used now in every sector. It opens just so many doors, and it's not that you necessarily want to be a coder or programmer, but just having that, it's like speaking an additional language. You're just going to open so many doors. You're not going to lose anything. You're just going to gain, and it'll definitely help your university applications and job applications further down the line. And if you're ever interested in starting a company for yourself, so much is in tech. And so even if you're not the chief technical officer to chief technology officer, if you understand that, it will put you in a much better position. So those are my words of advice.
Perfect. So any last takers? Okay. If not, I think we can close this keynote session off here. So thank you once again so much, Bena, for taking the time out of your day to come and share your experiences with all of us, as well as answer some difficult questions about our futures and our career paths. So hopefully everyone here was able to gain some new insight on the field of fintech, on technology in general, and hopefully have a better understanding of where you're planning to go. So that will be all for today. That concludes our keynote session, and we thank you all for coming out as well. We hope you enjoyed, and we hope to see you at our next session. Thank you all.
Thank you.